introductions, and then I will ask the prepared questions, which will ask the same question to each of the two final candidates. So Daniel, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Mark, thank you very much for that. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for having me here today. I generally want to thank the City Council for the opportunity to be considered for the City Manager position here in Beloit. I want to thank all of you for coming out here today and hearing me speak briefly and answer some of the questions that you have fielded to Mark as part of this process. It's a great part to see such active involvement from the community during a process like this, and really shows the commitment and things that I have seen leading up to in my desire to apply and pursue this opportunity, and that is the commitment and collaboration of the community to be able to move forward. So, as Mark said, my name is Daniel Ortiz Hernandez. I am currently the Assistant City Manager for the City of Ennis, Texas. Ennis is a city of about 25,000 residents, just about 35 miles south of Dallas. It's a community that has a deep, rich history with a diverse community, a diverse economic base, and a community that's gone through a tremendous amount of growth in the last decade. And so I in my role, directly oversee police, fire, finance, HR, and public works and utilities. But really I've served a number of, and worked with all the departments as we've navigated the growth that the community has gone through. Now, I know what many of you are thinking. What does someone from Texas know about Beloit and know about Wisconsin winters? I can tell you that I have a heavy parka hanging in my closet that's rated for below zero. It has the fluffy stuff around the face to help with the wind. So it might fit me a little loose now, but I am well prepared for your snow and ice and winters here in Beloit. That's one of the facets that I think I'm drawn to Beloit. I love the four seasons. My kids love the snow, and it's a little too hot at times in Texas. But I know that some of you have had the opportunity to review my background that was shared by the city and my professional history. And I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit more. I know some of you have read that. Others of you have stalked me on social media, and that's perfectly fine. But a little bit more of my background. Certainly I've served as a city management in a city management capacity for the past 13 years. But really, my public service journey starts much farther than that. Growing up, my wife and I both grew up in California. We grew up in Los Angeles. They wanted, my wife and my two children, my daughter is 10, my son is 9. They unfortunately couldn't be here today because they have state testing this week, and the principal would not be happy with me if I pulled them out of school this week. So needless to say, but my wife and I grew up in Los Angeles. I specifically grew up in the community just outside of South Los Angeles before my family moved to the San Fernando Valley in the northern part of the city of LA. My wife and I did go to high school together, although we weren't high school sweethearts. We met together when I was back home during graduate school, during Christmas break, and she was back home during her PhD program. And so we connected and have been married together for over 13 years now, and together for over 16 with 2 wonderful children. But it was during that time, I think, growing up in Los Angeles, going through middle school, I had the opportunity to serve as a student volunteer. When my school wasn't in session, I'd go back to my elementary school and served in helping teachers and helping elementary school students during their coursework and curriculum. As I progressed through high school, I had the opportunity to serve as a youth soccer referee and coach. And as I progressed through high school later on, I had the opportunity to volunteer. I had achieved my brown belt in Shotokan Karate and had the opportunity to then serve as an assistant instructor at my local recreation center during that time frame. I continued that public service journey as I went through my undergraduate schooling at California State University Northridge, where I was pursuing my degree in political science. I had the opportunity to work as a teaching assistant for a school that specialized in helping students that were either high risk and or were facing some disciplinary issues in schools. And that really gave me a great snapshot of what local government and communities can do in helping youth navigate and grow up to be young and really, meaningful members of the community as we navigated different resources that we wrapped around these students that were being challenged in school and within their communities. Afterwards, as I was finishing up my undergraduate degree, I had the opportunity to serve as a volunteer within the AmeriCorps program. They had partnered with the court system there in California and formed a program called Justice Corps. And I served as a volunteer helping low-income and self-represented litigants that were seeking information or were navigating a court process in the civil courts, either in family or housing law. So I had the opportunity to do that for a year before graduating. Between undergraduate and then my graduate schooling, I had the opportunity to serve as a Section 8 advisor at the Housing Authority in the city of LA. And shortly thereafter left. I had been awarded a fellowship to pursue my master's in public administration at Arizona State University. That was a program that was specifically geared towards city management and developing individuals that wanted to pursue a career in city management. That exposed me to a great network of colleagues and peers in the city management field from across the country. It really set me off on this course that I'm on today. I had the privilege to serve in Casa Grande, Arizona after graduate school. I was a management analyst in the city manager's office. Casa Grande is a city between Phoenix and Tucson that when I started there was about 48,000 residents, but in the decade prior had grown from roughly about 20,000 residents to what it was at that time, 48. This is at the end of the decade, right as we're also dealing with a downturn. And so very fortunate to have had that exposure and experience, and I also served as part of not only the city manager's team, but we also consolidated and made we were part of the city's economic development team, marketing the community, working with developers, working with site selectors, going to trade conferences, promoting the community, and really trying to attract industries and commercial that really fit the values of the community. It was after that I had the opportunity to step into and start really my city management positions, first going on to become the city administrator in Kimball, Nebraska, far on the rural side of Nebraska, an hour east of Cheyenne, Wyoming. And then thereafter have the opportunity to serve in the communities of Wasco, California, Webster City, Iowa as a city manager, and now currently serve as the assistant city manager in Ennis. A big part of why I want to be here today is as I looked at this community and saw the opportunity, and my wife and I, we have a strong set of personal values. And as we reflected on the community and what we were seeing, what we were hearing, what I've seen over the past several days, we saw aspects of the community that really resonated and reflected both our personal experiences growing up and our professional accomplishments and opportunities we've had. And so professionally, there's a lot in terms of what the community is navigating, a lot of the services and departments that the city has that I have navigated and led throughout my career. But also personally, as my wife and I raise our 10 and 9-year-old, we're looking for a community that really reflects our personal values. And we see a lot of those aspects and features here in Beloit. And that's the reason why I want to serve as your city manager.
Thank you, Daniel. I think I may have failed to introduce myself. My name is Mark Peterson. I'm with MGT Consulting, and the city has engaged me to assist with this recruitment process. So I'm a former city manager down in Illinois. And I also want to acknowledge we have several members of the city council here. If you want to just raise your hand, there you go. And appreciate everyone being here. New member of the council is here. So thank you all for being here, and we also have a number of members of city staff that are in attendance too. So Daniel, this is your first question. Beloit is a diverse community with about 22% Hispanic, 14% Black, and is a more racially and ethnically diverse community than most Wisconsin cities. How would you make sure that all residents feel heard and represented by city government, not just those who show up to council meetings?
Sure. Well, I appreciate that question. I think it's that level of diversity, but also the collaboration and the intentionality that has gone to connect with those segments of the community that really has drawn me to Beloit. And certainly I think for me, I've navigated communities that are diverse, and I myself come from a diverse background. So that awareness and that ability to interact and relate with those different facets of the community is something that I personally and professionally have direct experience with. Certainly in this community, I think the big part with not just the cultural differences, but with all residents as a whole, a big part of being a leader in the community is being able to actively listen. A big part of what I would navigate is certainly to listen with the different stakeholders and groups and understand not only what they're navigating, but for me to understand the history and the context of what they've gone through in the past, to make those connections and make sure that we align our communication strategies with the messaging that we put forth and also the engagement with that. Beyond that, on a cultural level, one of the things that I'm happy that I've been a part of for the better part of the last year and a half, I recently last year joined and served on the national board for the Local Government Hispanic Network. That's a national network of professionals in city governments and county government as well. And a big part of that is one, to raise the awareness and the level of engagements with populations and governments that serve a diverse population. But what's also neat about that is it's not just senior leaders, but it's also staff and personnel from cities and counties from across the country at various different levels. So part of our efforts is to really promote that level of communication and engagement with residents, really getting to understand the cultural awareness, but also the resources and services and the impacts that those services have on the community as a whole, and also on each individual level with the different segments.
Excellent, thank you. Downtown Beloit is thriving with new restaurants, hotels, ABC Supply Stadium, and one of the largest farmers markets in the area. But residents in neighborhoods outside of downtown don't always see the same energy reaching them. What specific steps would you take in your first year to extend investment beyond the downtown core, and how have you done so successfully in your previous positions?
Sure, I really appreciate that question. Certainly I've had the opportunity over the last 2 days to, really as I've prepared and researched the community coming in, to spend the last 2 days touring and driving around the community and avoiding a couple of your potholes at the same time. But certainly I've driven from east to west, north to south, so I see the connections and I see where some of those questions may come from. A big part of my leadership style in the community is to get out and to engage residents, both formally and informally, understand who are the stakeholders, understand who are the individuals and groups that are not actively involved in our process, and reach out to them to understand why, or reach out what are the barriers to do that. Here you have a socially and economically diverse community, and so making sure that our communication strategies are aligned with the efforts and that they're multifaceted. One of the things that I've navigated during my time in Webster City, Iowa, was I had a similarly diverse population, almost very similar in terms of its racial makeup here. And what I found is in terms of navigating those different population sets is that sometimes those formal groups and nonprofits that are established that serve them, they oftentimes are not reaching everyone. They can be diverse, they can be siloed. And so part of the city's efforts and my personal efforts is to really engage folks at different levels, understanding where they're at, meeting them, offering them the opportunity to engage, offering them the opportunity to engage outside of City Hall. One of the things, especially in Hispanic cultures, is certainly understanding that where they come from, and whether it's Mexico or Central America, local government is not looked at in a positive fashion. Many times where they come from, their governments may deal with some challenges and/or corruption. So there is inherently a lack of trust from where they come from that creates a barrier in engaging with them. So part of that, what we have to do is reach out to them and build those relationships and build that trust through communication and consistent and intentional engagement with them at different levels. Understanding who are going to be those informal stakeholders and making sure we connect with them so that then they can connect with others. So that was very pivotal, I think, for some of the projects that I worked in Iowa as well as in California, was finding those stakeholders that have an active voice in the community, but are not always attending our meetings, are not presently always available during our formal functions, and engaging with them outside of that formal process to making sure they're aware, winning them over as champions and making them be part of our stakeholders and champions in the community as we engage those segments of the population.
Thank you. Third question, housing affordability is a challenge here for both renters and buyers. The city has utilized TIF housing funds and invested in new residential development, but demand still outpaces supply. At the same time, many people who work in Beloit choose to live somewhere else. What would you do to make sure working families can afford to live here, and what have you done to make a community a place people actively choose to call home?
How much time do I got? That's a very, I appreciate the question, and certainly I think that is a very complex and a broad challenge for this community as well as many others in the Midwest. I think it's multifaceted in the sense that one, you have employers that are growing, you have employers that are wanting to come, and certainly the development of the casino and that fruition is going to add further pressure to the workforce who are then going to need housing in the community. That's only going to add pressure to the rents and the availability of housing in the community. So, you have that to contend with. The other aspect I would say is certainly, and as I heard, I'm going to, reference Council President Levy during his annual address to the council, was certainly we have a narrative problem in our community. The story that we tell, what's told in the media, what's told in social media, what's told to the public. And so from a housing standpoint and development standpoint, we need to change that narrative and put it in a much more positive life and really put forth the positive efforts we're working to change and show how that effort is changing. I will tell you that in leading up to this process, I reached out to a friend of mine that's up the road in McFarland, and the way he described described Beloit was that you guys have gone through a renaissance period and that we're changing how the community feels, acts, and portrays. And so we need to be able to carry that forward and message that. But in terms of the affordability question, certainly I know that there are many stakeholders, there are many nonprofits and agencies that are working on that issue, from in terms of helping homeowners, helping potential homeowners and residents pursue funding opportunities to renovate or fix up their home. I know the city has some low interest home loans and grants programs as well. So part of my first effort was really to understand what's the breadth of those programs. What has been the success, what has worked, what hasn't worked, how are we reaching residents in that fashion. I've navigated a similar problem in my past communities, and so really when you look at affordability, you also look at I look at it as neighborhood revitalization or neighborhood stabilization. And you look at just your housing stock, what does that look like? Because certainly you have some available homes. They may be in a lower end. They may need homes that may need a lot of work to fix up. So for someone in the workforce that is making the bare minimum or who's just barely getting by, to make a significant investment in a home on top of making a significant investment to bring that home up to a livable standard is a considerable task. So understanding how those programs have worked, how they've been marketed, is very crucial as we work forward. But also understanding and aligning the different agencies and nonprofits that work in that, making sure we all understand what's our role in this problem, what were we actively working on, and make sure we're working in the same direction of that. I will say that when it comes to TIF, and I've navigated, I have 3 TIF districts and where I come from in Ennis. I've navigated TIF in Iowa and in Arizona. And so one of the challenges that I see with TIF when leveraging that is certainly the resources that takes away. I know that you look at TIF to try to build and expand the housing stock and availability, and oftentimes I caution and really look at that in a much more holistic view, and I caution on the overuse of TIF without doing the due diligence and understanding on the impact from a long-term perspective, because certainly you have other entities that rely on property tax revenue that then is capped by TIF, and so as you build that increment, schools and other agencies that rely on property taxes are impacted for the next 20, 25 years that you have that TIF district in place. So I'm not saying that TIF shouldn't be used for housing developments or other economic development projects, but as a city and as a city manager, I have to be very mindful of the broad, holistic impacts of what that has across all the services and all the agencies that serve the community.
Thank you, Daniel. Next question. The Ho-Chunk Nation is building a $705 million casino, hotel, and conference center, with the casino set to open this fall. This is the largest construction project in Beloit's history. It will bring around 1,500 permanent jobs, a 312-room hotel, and a 2,000-seat convention center. How would you maximize the benefits of this development for the broader community while managing the challenges that come with it, such as traffic, infrastructure, workforce needs, and the relationship with the Ho-Chunk Nation?
Yeah, well, I certainly appreciate it, and that's another big, broad question, not an easy one, I think. But certainly, I think first and foremost, you have the relationship with the Indian tribe. And so, and from my experience from Arizona and other communities, I know that relationship takes a great amount of trust to cultivate and to sustain that over time. And so that's probably my first priority, is to understand who are the stakeholders with the tribe and engaging with them and building that relationship and fostering that trust and collaboration to understand where their project is at in the development process, where are their long-term goals, and what are the implications of that development moving forward. I do know that you guys have an economic development corporation that really is spearheading a lot of the economic development efforts in the community, and they have the Gateway Business Park on the east side of that. And so part of this casino is hopefully to be a catalyst to further expand and promote the commercial industrial developments on that eastern side of the corridor. And so understanding where those projects at, I think I looked it up not too long ago, and there's about 10 industrial parcels left in that Gateway project. So understanding how those being marketed, what are the specific sectors in the industries or commercial development that are being trying to solicit to come to the community. I think also from the workforce perspective is what are their workforce going to need? You know, we mentioned they're going to have a significant need for employees, but what are the skill sets that are going to be required for that, and making sure that we align those with partners, whether that be the community colleges or the technical schools, to making sure that those trade programs are available so that when a workforce is required, no different than any other industry, that those are available there as well. The housing is going to be the tricky part. I mean, you have an X number of employees that are going to need housing in the area. Again, that's going to add further pressure to the price of housing that it's already limited. And so making sure that we understand when those key employment groups, those numbers are going to come to fruition, if they're going to be phased in or they're going to happen over time, to better understand how best to adapt and making sure we coordinate that message with our stakeholders and our partners at the city.
Thank you. Beloit's population has been essentially the same for over 20 years. As you know, growth matters for the tax base, for jobs, and for the city's future. But large-scale projects like data centers and major developments can raise real concerns about environmental impact, infrastructure strain, and transparency. How do you pursue economic development and population growth aggressively while making sure it serves the people already living here, not just the developers that are proposing it?
See, that one's a simpler question. No, so for me, economic development, it's very broad, and it's really, I think, very much based on what the values and the characteristics that the community is trying to pursue. But I like to use the term community vitality, not economic development. Economic development by IEDC, the International Economic Development Council, really refers to programs and policies that promote community growth and vitality through the promotion and the retention and attraction of businesses, specifically to grow the tax base. For me, I look at it as community vitality because that forces me and others to look at it from a broader lens, from a community-wide perspective that really looks at the different issues and the different facets of the community. If I'm just looking at attracting businesses and the job numbers, that's one thing, but that is not going to let me focus on the housing issues, on the infrastructure issues, on the cultural and socioeconomic issues and challenges that the community is facing. So for me, community vitality looks at the community in a much more broader, holistic perspective. So when I approach specifically economic development efforts to market the community, I focus on what are going to be industries and sectors that are going to further enhance and accentuate the community as a whole and fit with the overall culture of the community. We can work all day long to get an industry that's going to come in here and pay minimum wage for jobs, but is that the best interest of the community? Is that the best direction that the community wants to go in? But also when it comes to economic development, because of the multiple different services and departments that I've managed and led, I also look at what that impact is, not only from both the jobs and the revenue side that it creates from property taxes and other aspects of that, but I also look on the impact on our services. I look at the impact on schools. I look at the impact of the community as a whole, traffic patterns. So I'll give you a good example. Right now, one of the projects that I'm navigating is several years ago, our city and NS had approved a special use permit for a battery storage facility, somewhat very similar to a data center. It was approved. They had provided for specific conditions that they had to meet under the SUP. One of those conditions had a timeline of when they had to complete and start their land use in the appropriate manner. But also part of that economic development piece, that was specifically with our planning department. As they went through the process, they had to complete a civil review and development review process. And that's where that's where I came in more than anything else. As we started to review the civil plans that were permitted, we started realizing where there was going to be conflicts with the development plan, with the surrounding land use, where the surrounding land use was going to be neighborhood residential. But more importantly, we also looking at the conflicts based on their civil plans that they submitted, how drainage was going to work, where was it going to drain, what was going to be the impact on fire service. Because when lithium batteries catch on fire, those are very problematic to put out, and they're not easy to put out, especially when the site itself wasn't going to have water to serve that area. One of the other key parts that I zeroed in on was the fact that their drainage plan identified that their runoff to the site was about 900 feet from a tributary that feeds less than a quarter mile from our drinking water source. So part of the process in looking at that environmental sustainability and the community benefit as a whole and protecting the community was realizing that through the civil review process and fact checking with their SUP, realizing that this project was not going to be sustainable unless the developer would amend and alter their plans. Unfortunately, because of that, The developer chose not to amend their plans, and we're in the process of repealing their SUP on the basis that the impact and the negative consequence and the fact that their developments really didn't fit the land use area that it was being built around.
Okay, Daniel, 3 more questions. We're done with the easy ones.
Oh, man.
Okay. Our school district has struggled with declining enrollment, low test scores, and high staff turnover. The city doesn't run the schools, but education directly affects housing values, workforce development, and quality of life. Give us a specific example of how you partnered with a school district or an educational institution in a previous role. What did you do and what came of it?
Well, sure. I think, in all of the cities that I've managed and that I've helped to lead, one of the big things is to establish for me a relationship and a personal relationship with the school leadership, the school superintendent and other principals. I made it a point when I started in Wasco to not only get to meet and get to know the superintendent, but I also went to all the schools and got to know the principals and their leadership to understand, what are the challenges they're facing from a community. That provided me a different lens. And I did that partially because of my experience, having my personal experiences growing up, but also my experience as a teaching assistant and understanding what the schools go through. And that sometimes it's a partnership between the school district and the city and navigating, how we work and dealing with the issues that our students and i.e. our youth are navigating. So that's probably first and foremost for me, is establishing that relationship with the school superintendent, whomever that's selected down the road. The other piece of it too is making sure that my staff is fully aware that we have open and engaging relationships with the staff as well, particularly with our police department and the school district as well, as we're aware of the social issues and student issues that not always are constrained within the boundaries of the school, but often will reach back out into the community. And so making sure we're aware and have a partnership in a collaborative fashion. I think for one of the challenges with a lot of school districts is certainly the expectation with parents and how are we engaging residents, how are we engaging parents to understand the meaning and the importance of them going to school. In reading and preparing for this, I know that absenteeism is a big factor in some of the test scores and the issues that you have at the school. Funding is another issue with the referendum that I believe had failed last year. So all those are elements that, while we cannot directly influence and have an impact, we need to be aware and where possible partner with the school district as best as possible to navigate some of those challenges. I will share that there are examples from across the country where, as youth, me growing up, I was privileged to have opportunities to be part of recreation programs, to have recreation facilities to be able to go out to and play. I know that here, as spread out as the city is, and there is a lack of recreation amenities, not necessarily land, but just the fact of amenities within a close walking distance of many of your neighborhoods. One of the things that I've seen that work successfully in other communities in Michigan and California and in other states that I've seen is they've partnered with school districts to essentially share space, share recreation facilities to maximize the amounts and the number of amenities that might be available to students and to the neighborhoods after school and after hours and on the weekends. But that was also done in partnership in making sure that police, law enforcement, and some of the other groups, community groups, were aligned to making sure that it was a meaningful relationship that maximized, and the goals were clearly stated in terms of the intent in providing a meaningful opportunity for you to have a recreation amenity in their neighborhoods.
Okay, the city of Beloit and the town of Beloit are having very productive meetings about the possibility of consolidating their fire and EMS departments. The move is driven by staffing challenges, rising costs, and the goal of delivering better service to both communities. Please provide an example in which they have been directly involved, in which you have been directly involved in creating and or overseeing any service consolidations in your previous positions.
Yeah, I think as I reflect back now, I haven't been involved with the actual consolidation. I will share that at least my time in Casa Grande. So we were a city that we shared services by way and had an IGA, an intergovernmental agreement between some neighboring cities for different services. At the time, I think at the time that included the city of Eloy, and we provided them IT services as well as our planning department to review some of their planning related services. So the notion and the concept of collaboration is something that I'm very familiar with. I'll share with you that in my past communities, I've navigated 3 or 4 different functions or I think formats for fire service. Everything from having an all-volunteer fire department to having a hybrid fire department with, I think in Webster City we had 4 full-time firefighters and 26 volunteers, to where I was in Wasco where we contracted out our fire and public and police service with the county. And so I navigated that negotiation and the renewal of the contract with the county's fire service, so very familiar with those aspects. In Ennis right now, we have our own fire service, and that includes firefighters that are trained in EMT and paramedics cross-trained in that. We're part of a regional collaborative response system where we partner with our neighboring cities to partner and respond and provide those services. So the framework and the concept is something that I'm very familiar with and very familiar in navigating. And a key part to that is understanding what the level of service and expectations are going to be. The one thing as from a fire service or actually a public safety service perspective is what's the expectation for personnel? What's going to be the rotation? Are they going to be expecting personnel and units to be stationed nearby? What's going to be the response? What's the impact going to be on the community of Beloit? And what are our other mutual agreements, mutual response agreements that we may have? We've certainly, for instance, when we have we have 4 fire stations, actually 3. But when we have a major incident or a major structure that all of our available units are responding to, there's an automatic mutual agreement that dispatches from a neighboring city that then covers our area or then supports and directly goes to the fire. And so those instances and understanding of if we partner and support the town of Beloit, what are those agreements and those backup resources available to support in the event of an incident that would occur elsewhere. The other big part is personnel costs. Personnel costs is going to be a dramatic increase. It's currently a significant portion of the city's budget. Between police and fire, that accounts for 60% of your general fund. And so if the expectation and if there's going to be the anticipation of adding additional personnel, the city then has to factor that in terms of its general fund and its overall finances and what that looks like. And is there a revenue cost sharing agreement that gets reimbursed from them? I will share from another public safety example that I was intimately involved with. When I was in Nebraska, we had received a grant for a school resource officer. We partnered at the time, partly because of my relationship I had formed with the superintendent, we partnered with the school district to share in the cost of that SRO officer for the duration of the grant. We agreed to provide the majority of the funding and the equipment. They provided for a certain cost related that covered some of the personnel, labor costs and overtime costs associated with that officer. But again, as I said, the collaboration and the structure of an agreement with a neighboring community for services is something that I'm very familiar with and I've navigated in different facets.
Thank you. Final question. Based upon what you've learned about Beloit so far, what do you see as our greatest strengths as a community, and what do you think are the biggest challenges we're facing?
Save the best for last, didn't you? I would certainly say, the greatest strength for me is certainly what I've seen is the level of intent and collaboration by outside groups to work with the community, work with the city to address the community's issues in a proactive and a positive manner. Leading up to this, one of the things, and before applying it, was I started taking notes and have a running list of the different stakeholders, whether that be different business groups, whether it be the nonprofits, whether it be the business owners, major businesses, employers, also social groups. So my list is up to 45, and I think every time I keep reading it, it keeps continuing to grow. And so that was very impressive to see such energy and a sense of commitment to collaboration in the community to work together in making the community move forward and thrive. I think as one of the weaknesses, and I'll be honest, I think there's a couple opportunities when it comes to weaknesses. And I think I can break those out between weaknesses within the city and also weaknesses as a community as a whole. I will say that probably the weakness in the city is the fact that your revenue streams are very limited. Your general fund is very limited. You don't have a lot of flexibility, and unless the state changes certain laws, you're going to be limited in terms of how much revenue you can generate from a property tax perspective, let alone also some of the state shared revenue that comes back to the city. Especially when state shared revenue is about 60% of your revenues. And so you're very limited in terms of the flexibility you can do. So it really forces in the intentionality of maximizing these relationships we have with external stakeholders to bring about some of these creative solutions to tackle some of the community's issues. From a community perspective, I think the greatest challenge and the greatest weakness the community has is going to be your school district. The challenges that that faces, mainly because when we talked about workforce, when we talk about economic development, you're going to have students that are then you're going to want to eventually graduate and be meaningful members and contributors to the community. But if there is a gap, if there is a challenge, there's no guarantee that those students are going to graduate, let alone stay in Beloit and then be meaningful members of the community and have the essential skills and the essential soft skills to contribute and be part of a workforce. I think that's going to be the biggest challenge and probably the toughest nut to crack over the next few years, is how to bring about that change. And I know you have the new academy, the new leadership academy, and I fear a part of what that's going to happen is further draw the students and the families that are active and are wanting and be proactive members, and they're going to excel and thrive in this new academy. But yet you're still going to have the challenges of the school district and some of those challenges that they have to navigate. And so that's one of the greatest, I think, struggles and challenges that we face as a community moving forward. The answer is not simple. It's going to be a very complex, and it has to be a collaborative approach that engages, both the community, the school board, the school superintendent, and school staff to really identify what's going to be the bigger issue. Because ultimately, your youth is your future. And if that's in question mark right now, what are we going to do?
Thank you, Daniel. I'll give you the opportunity to make a closing comment if you'd like to.
I didn't say enough. Oh, man. No, well, very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today and to be considered. I've certainly had a wonderful journey in my profession leading up to this point, to serve as a city manager and to serve in such diverse communities that have diverse services, but also a diverse culture. Very much appreciate that opportunity. As I mentioned before, my desire to serve this community is both professional and personal, as the personal part is a big part. I've had many accomplishments and I've had many successes and I've had opportunities to pursue some very rewarding leadership development programs. But the best part of what I do is certainly being a father and being a husband and the impact that has on my family. I will tell you that I remember there was once, my son, when he was in first grade, two stories with that was one, my son was responding to a teacher, and probably in a way he shouldn't have because he thinks he knows everything. He was probably 6 or 7 at the time. And he says, "Well, my dad's your boss." No. But certainly I think, they understand and I appreciate what they know of what I do. It's very meaningful for me when I make such a positive impact in the community. And so that's a big driver for me personally, is certainly to reflect on my personal experiences with my professional growth that I've had and to be able to apply that here in Beloit and help Beloit move forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you. You can take some time to introduce yourself. Thank you.
Reserve judgment on the applause. All right, are we good? Awesome. I'm going to keep the intro fairly brief because there's probably a lot of questions that will allow me to extend into my background and work experience, etc. But my name is John Weidl. I've been the city manager in Whitewater for about the last 4 years, and over that time we have focused on organizational stability after a period of high turnover. We've worked on our economic development platform, which includes manufacturing, commercial, and most importantly, housing. And finally, we've worked on financial stability because in a city like Whitewater, where we are funded at one of the lowest per capita rates in the state, it's extremely important that we're judicious with our resources. Beyond that, I am a public administrator and economic developer by trade. I got my master's degree at Northern Illinois University. I have my certified economic development credentials from the IEDC, International Economic Development Council. I also am a credentialed manager from ICMA. There's a lot of letters coming at you. That's the International City Manager Association. I also am a certified public manager from UW-Madison Extension, and I am currently a doctoral student. I'll be finishing my classwork this May in business administration at UW-Whitewater. My wife is an educator. She's a teacher, 4th grade teacher in southeastern Wisconsin. We've lived in our home for the last 10 years, and we've been in southern Wisconsin for the last 15 years. We have 2 children, 2 dogs, and I'm very excited to be here tonight. I think the other questions will allow me to segue into some of the more professional stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, John. First question, John. Beloit is a diverse community with about 22% Hispanic, 14% Black, and is more racially and ethnically diverse than are most Wisconsin cities. How would you make sure that all residents feel heard and represented by city government and not just those who show up to council meetings?
Probably a small, similar crowd that show up to the council meetings, right? Diversity is important. Whitewater is a university community, so we have a high student population. We also have experienced a lot of newcomers to our community, including through immigration, and we have about a 20% of our student population speaks a language other than English at home. We also have an increasing Hispanic population. What I found works best is, first of all, being physically available. That's step one. The manager has to be around and out in the community meeting with organizations. In Whitewater, that's groups such as the Immigrant Support Coalition. There are various community groups, but it's about being present and listening and learning for opportunities and also occasionally looking for those sources of tension. In addition, it's about using tools that reach across a broad spectrum of the community. In Whitewater, we've used community satisfaction surveys, we've used public forums, open houses, and other structured and unstructured events to make sure we're capturing opinions and ideas from our diverse set of stakeholders. Finally, and most importantly to me, it's about connecting what you hear to your funding and your outcomes. And in Whitewater, that meant ensuring all of our forums are bilingual, ensuring that our meetings are closed captioned in 40 different languages. It meant implementing a stipend for employees who are bilingual and providing a pathway for our current employees to learn Spanish. What I take away from diversity is, while each community is different, there are tools that can be used to ensure a broad spectrum of stakeholder participation. And then most importantly for me, you're going to hear this time and again, it's about connecting that to your funding and your outcomes.
Thank you. Downtown Beloit is thriving with restaurants, hotels, ABC Supply Stadium, and one of the largest farmers markets in the region. But residents in neighborhoods outside of the downtown don't always see that same energy reaching them. What specific steps would you take in your first year to extend investment beyond the downtown area? And how have you done this successfully before in your prior positions?
There's several questions in that question. The first place I would go, and it goes back to connecting things to funding and outcomes. But when you're focusing on downtown development, it's really about the placemaking experience. So figuring out what that identity is, making sure that's known, and making sure the area around that has meaningful opportunities to participate. As far as ensuring economic development, that's probably in my wheelhouse. I've worked in all the communities I've served to both work on downtown tax increment financing districts, but also neighborhood redevelopment around that. It's more than simply applying tax increment financing to the equation. Through my credentialing and my experience as an economic developer, there are many tools that can be used for neighborhood revitalization and to ensure the things that are happening in neighborhoods, and we will eventually get to it, some bigger projects like the casino are being managed in a way so those benefits reach all the different communities across Beloit. So for me, it's about placemaking. That's what downtowns are. They're centers of activity and interaction and fun, and it keeps the youth engaged. What that needs to translate to is how are you developing around that? And again, there's specific neighborhood development strategies we've used in Whitewater that include revitalization of existing properties. What we've found is some of the properties around the downtown are some of the oldest properties in the city. And so we've developed loan programs and we've developed grant programs that help property owners in those areas bring those properties up to code. And that money can even be used to convert rental properties into owner-occupied. And so we're focusing on specific areas around the downtown to do that. I think I got a little off base with my question, but I will stop it at that.
That's good, thank you. Housing affordability is a challenge here for both renters and buyers. The city has utilized TIP housing funds and invested in new residential development, but demand still outpaces supply. At the same time, many people who work in Beloit choose to live somewhere else. What would you do to make sure that working families can afford to live here? And what have you done to make a community a place people actively choose to call home?
Whitewater has a very similar problem. we export about 80% of our working population. We just had an economic base analysis done. I believe it's about 1,000 of our residents work and live in Whitewater. It's less than 10%. What I focused on with housing is a three-pronged approach. First thing you have to do is get more units in the pipeline. Whether that's looking at places your infrastructure has extended and opportunities exist, parcels in receivership at financial institutions, or other things that can be quickly activated. You simply need to get more projects in the pipeline. The second thing to do is some of the things you're already doing. Using tax increment financing, there's been some changes at the state level to tax increment financing law to better allow for housing. Using those tools and making sure those are implemented in a way that helps more projects pencil through to a shovel in the ground. A lot of projects get lost in the process when they're being vetted and simply lack the financing in today's economic climate and construction prices in order to work. The third piece is looking at your existing stock, and I've talked about how in Whitewater we have homeowner rehabilitation programs. Ensuring strong neighborhoods means ensuring that you're focused on your existing housing and that there are programs and options available. In Whitewater, about 40% of our housing stock is older than 50 years, and about 60% of our stock is older than 30 years. So we have a challenge building new. And again, just to bring it all back around, my solution is more projects in the pipeline, using the existing and new financial tools available to ensure more projects are hitting the ground, and paying attention to your existing housing stock, both through code enforcement and through rehabilitation programs.
Thank you, John. Next question. The Ho-Chunk Nation is building a $705 million casino, hotel, and conference center with the casino set to open this fall. This is the largest construction project in Beloit's history. It will bring around 1,500 permanent jobs, a 312-room hotel, and a 2,000-seat convention center. What would you do to maximize the benefits of this development for the broader community while managing the challenges that come with it, such as traffic, infrastructure, workforce needs, and the relationship with the Ho-Chunk Nation?
Well, the opportunities are huge. The spillover effects from having such an investment in this region is going to not only create opportunity, but stresses on employment, on housing, on transportation access, and on the infrastructure. Ensuring that Beloit is successful and capitalizes on that, in my opinion, revolves around making sure that the staff, the city operations, our financing, and our infrastructure is aligned around what's coming downstream, because the most important impacts from that development are yet to come. There's current construction jobs, there will be future permanent jobs, but from that will be additional tourism, additional notoriety, and additional opportunities for other investment and additional tax revenue. And here a little bit. With that, make sure that those revenues, right, those downstream impacts are dealt with in a way that aligns with the priorities of the governing body. We know housing is a challenge. We know infrastructure is a challenge. I don't have all the answers yet, I'll be perfectly honest about that. But I believe in my skills as an economic developer. I believe I have the Wisconsin-specific tax increment financing expertise and a track record of successful economic development through southern Wisconsin. And what I'd hope to do is learn more over the first 6 months to a year on the process, especially leading up to the construction and opening, and work together with the staff, the community, and the governing body to identify those successes and ensure they're translated in a way that the casino does not become a strain on your services, but becomes a success and a way to support them.
Thank you. Next question. Beloit's population has been essentially the same for over 20 years. As you know, growth matters for the tax base, for jobs, and for the city's future. But large-scale projects like data centers and major developments can raise real concerns about environmental impact, infrastructure strain, and transparency. How do you pursue economic development and population growth aggressively while making sure it serves the people already living here, not just the developers proposing it?
I'll start where I was going to end with this question because I prepared for this one. But managed intentionally, growth and development and the stresses coming from that do not have to be oppositional forces. And what I mean by that, taking a step back. Sorry, I'm going to do one thing. Start with the beginning of the question again. I started at the end. I just need the first sentence.
Okay.
I'd rather get it right.
Beloit's population has been essentially the same for over 20 years.
Okay. So in dealing with that, the first thing again is the casino. Again, to return to that. There's going to be demand for employees to move here. There's going to be demand for employees to move around. And yes, housing is the single biggest stressor that comes out of that. In Whitewater, we have been successful growing faster than the population trends, and that's something we've recently studied. And we have done that through aggressively pursuing housing types for all life cycles. And in Whitewater, that does create some political conflict because we are a university community, which means we are heavily a rental community, which the idea of adding additional rental units causes strain, not only on existing people in the community, but when you get to a meeting. What I think Beloit should seriously consider doing, even if I don't end up here, this would be my advice. Make sure you are building housing units in areas that make sense and not out of control, but at every opportunity you have. If it pencils and it aligns with your objectives and it aligns with that neighborhood, find a way to push that project forward. There was a study that recently came out, I forget the name of it, but it basically just said the future battle in Wisconsin, it is going to be over people because there's population declining, but it's going to be where are those people living and where are those people working. And so I see not only immense challenges on the horizon, but immense opportunity due to the fact people will be thinking about your community. People will think about moving here, and that will create some natural attrition, demand, and supply. I know that was very long-winded. I get excited about housing.
Thank you. 3 more questions.
Sure.
Our school district has struggled with declining enrollment, low test scores, and high staff turnover. The city doesn't run the schools, but education directly affects housing values, workforce development, and quality of life. Give us a specific example of how you partnered with the school district or educational institution in a previous role. What did you do and what became of it?
We have 2 ways that we partner very strongly with the Whitewater School District and their new superintendent, who some of you may know, Samuel Carnes. We have a very strong SRO program. We recently passed a public safety referendum, which not only added full-time fire and EMS, but also added the funding for a second school resource officer. Since he's gotten there, we've also worked closely on safety and emergency preparedness. I'm not going to go into the why, but prior to his tenure, the school district had an aversion to the types of safety training that we really need in place nowadays. And once Samuel got on board, and that's about 6 months ago now, the police chief and I met with him, and we have bi-weekly meetings going forward where we address these issues. But we're on a 3-year trajectory to do a reunification exercise. We're also going to do a live event with staff, and then in the 3rd year, we're going to do a full-blown incident, which will involve the university, the school district, and the city. And that's one of the ways I see us partnering with school district most importantly, and that's through the safety and the resource officer. In addition to that, the city rents and runs the Whitewater Aquatic and Fitness Center, which is located on school district property. School district partners with us financially. There's some staffing overlap. We provide swim lessons to their students. Their students provide lifeguards to our system. And that's a partnership that's been going on for about the last 20 years. And we recently extended the contract, and we're in the process of working together on a $3 million capital campaign that will ensure that there is, an annuity is not the right word, an endowment for the future capital needs, whether that's pool relining or equipment for the kids. So those are the main areas, and I think that truly does impact the school experience. If they're safe and there's extracurriculars, and the school is the city is being responsive to those needs, you can truly have a strong partnership.
Okay, thank you. The city of Beloit and town of Beloit are having very productive meetings about the possibility of consolidating their fire and EMS departments. The move is driven by staffing challenges, rising costs, and the goal of delivering better service to both communities. Please provide an example in which you have been directly involved in creating and or overseeing any service consolidations in your previous positions?
In 2023, when I arrived in Whitewater, the first order of business was to organize, prepare, and finance the conversion of the fire and EMS department from a nonprofit volunteer service to a municipally owned full-time fire and EMS department. And we did that within my first 18 months. We reduced response times by 70%. We added 17 full-time personnel. We achieved paramedic certification within the first 6 months of our doors being opened. What I learned through that process is it is challenging, and there's a lot of stakeholders, and I assume between the city and the town there will be several interested stakeholders. There's capital equipment, there's staff overlap, but at the end of the day we stayed focused on the outcomes and what was most important. We have a 6-municipality partnership. The city controls and owns the service, and we contract with 5 other surrounding municipalities. We worked with all of them. It was a lot of one-on-one meetings. It was going to their board meetings. It was presenting information. We worked on the staffing structures. We designed the financial model, and then we went to referendum on it. Referendum was approved, and we implemented. I'm not sure if a referendum is needed here or the financials. I haven't had any access to that information, but I think some of the similar concepts work here, and that's working with the surrounding stakeholders to figure out what's important. Focus on the outcomes of the delivery. That's where we stayed focused. We went from not being out the door in Whitewater in under 5 minutes to being anywhere in the city within 5 minutes, and anywhere in any of our surrounding municipalities within 10. That's what's important, delivering that care. We stayed focused on that, and we were able to come up with a partnership that'll last for a long, long time.
Thank you. The final question is this. Based upon what you've learned about Beloit so far, what do you see as our greatest strengths as a community, and what do you think are the biggest challenges we're facing?
Several of them cut both ways. Diversity is a huge strength. That's one of my favorite things about working in Whitewater. Having all the different perspectives. Democracy is messy, it's complicated, it can be long, and occasionally it's loud. But having more and different people involved in the process, in my experience, leads to better outcomes. Secondarily, you have a host of amazing opportunities. The casino is absolutely one. It is a game changer for this community, the region, and quite possibly the state. And I would make sure to stay focused on that, especially the downstream impacts of what that's going to do in terms of jobs and housing. The relationship with the town is something that needs to be worked through, and I think that can be done. It seems like there's a start to it. There's an agreement in place. If I had to add anything to that list, I would say it's operating in this financially challenging climate. Taxpayers are always concerned about the stewardship of their money. In Whitewater, we run on one of the lowest per capita budgets in the state of Wisconsin. So I understand financial challenges, and I understand how to make those work.
Okay, thank you, John. That concludes our prepared questions, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to make a closing statement if
Sure.
you'd like to.
My closing statement is, I believe that my experience, my economic development expertise, and my stability in the region, my wife and I aren't going anywhere, maps excellently to what the needs are in Beloit. Someone's going to need to get in here, and yes, while it takes time and making immediate decisions is not something I'm intending to do, making sure someone is catching up to speed on the economic development activity, making sure someone is focused on the housing vacancy crisis, and making sure someone is integrating themselves into the discussions regarding the fire and EMS service is going to be critically important. I have experience in all of those areas. It's Wisconsin-specific experience, our laws, our levy limits, and I believe I'm a seamless transition. Otherwise, I'm really happy to be here. I just want to thank you for the opportunity. I'm here all day tomorrow too, so this is the most, I got all the energy right now. I appreciate you showing up, most of all, to have this many people who care about what's happening in their community and want to provide input into the leadership and direction that's extremely important. And with that, I'll simply close with thank you.
Thank you. I want to remind you all that if you have friends